Welcome back to Cinematic Century Chronicle, where we explore at least one film from every year between 1920 and 2020. Today, we're traveling to Japan in 1926, to a film that for decades was thought lost, only to resurface and reveal one of the most daring experiments of the silent era. This is A Page of Madness, directed by Teinosuke Kinugasa, a film that turned insanity, grief, and subjectivity into pure visual form. It's one of my personal favorite films from the 1920s, not just for its historical significance, but for how unique and forward-thinking it still feels nearly a century later. Before we begin, a quick note. This video contains spoilers. A Page of Madness is a film that rewards attention and interpretation, so if you haven't seen it yet, it's worth experiencing firsthand, preferably in one of the restored versions available online. And one more note. Please forgive any mispronunciations that might occur throughout this video. I appreciate your understanding. A Page of Madness was produced independently by Teinosuke Kinugasa, with support from members of the Shinkankakuha, a 1920s modernist movement in Japan that emphasized inner perception, sensory experience, and experimental technique. The group included writers such as Yasunari Kawabata, who co-wrote the screenplay. The story follows a custodian working at a psychiatric hospital where his wife is confined after attempting to harm their child. As he performs his daily tasks, his guilt and grief begin to blur the boundary between his reality and the inmate's delusions. The film's perspective constantly shifts. At times, we see events as they occur, and at other times through his distorted imagination. There are no intertitles to guide the viewer, no clear timeline, and almost no conventional plot explanation. Kinugasa and his collaborators used editing, lighting, and framing to show mental processes directly on screen. Cuts shift rapidly between hallucination and reality, blurring the line between the custodian's imagination and what is physically happening inside the asylum. Rather than describing madness, the film tries to make the viewer feel its disorientation. Superimposed images, dissolves, and rhythmic repetitions visualize thoughts looping and breaking apart. The camera moves restlessly through corridors and cells, suggesting that both the characters and the audience are trapped in the same mental space. Even by international standards, this was radical filmmaking for 1926. Like most Japanese films of the silent era, A Page of Madness was screened with live musical accompaniment and narration from a benshi, a professional storyteller who stood beside the screen, explaining plot details and performing dialogue for all the characters. The film's benshi was Musei Tokugawa, one of the most famous narrators of the time, whose performances were a major draw for audiences. What distinguished A Page of Madness wasn't the absence of narration, but its visual design. The film included no intertitles and relied entirely on images and editing to express shifts in memory and emotion. Within that framework, the benshi's narration served to guide viewers through the fragmented imagery rather than replace it. The psychiatric hospital setting is both literal and symbolic. On one level, it's where the story takes place, a series of corridors, barred windows, and locked doors. But it's also a stand-in for the mind itself. The film continually blurs the line between the custodian's external duties and his internal breakdown. One of the most memorable sequences shows an inmate looking at a vent that has a superimposed baby on it. The image is unnerving, partly because of the surreal superimpositions that makes us question why the baby is framed this way. It's one of several images that blur the boundary between reality and imagination, a theme that runs through the rest of the film. Much of A Page of Madness is defined by how it uses film technique to express perception instead of plot. Kinugasa relies on rhythm, framing, and visual repetition to convey emotion and thought without dialogue or intertitles. The camera alternates between handheld and static setups, giving scenes a shifting energy that reflects the uncertainty of the characters' experiences. Editing is central to Kinugasa's approach. Rapid cuts, overlapping exposures, and recurring visual cues connect the custodian, his wife, and the other patients. Instead of progressing through clear narrative events, the film builds meaning through repetition, returning again and again to confined spaces, patterned light, and distorted reflections. These visual anchors replace dialogue, showing emotion and instability through rhythm and image rather than explanation. Smaller moments also reinforce the same themes. Bars and lattice shadows appear throughout the film, emphasizing both physical and psychological confinement. Overlapping exposures and layered faces suggest fractured identity. One quiet but telling image shows the custodian feeding a caged bird, a simple action that reflects his own situation, a man trapped by guilt, caring for someone who no longer knows him. These choices made A Page of Madness difficult to categorize when it was first screened. It didn't follow the conventions of commercial Japanese cinema or Western silent dramas. The emphasis on fragmented imagery and repeated visual structure reflected an interest in showing inner life through composition rather than through dialogue or exposition. The film's opening dance sequence establishes both the setting and the film's visual language. A woman dances in what appears to be a grand hall. The camera follows her movement closely, emphasizing rhythm and motion. Then the perspective shifts, revealing that she is a patient in the psychiatric hospital, imagining the ballroom from inside her cell. This moment introduces one of the film's key ideas, the contrast between reality and imagination. Kinugasa presents both with the same visual intensity, allowing the viewer to experience her perception directly rather than simply observe it. The transition from fantasy to reality, achieved through a dissolve, is one of the film's clearest examples of how editing conveys psychological change. The dance returns later as the spark for a riot. As the performer spins, Kinugasa builds disorder with Dutch angles, rapid superimpositions, and distorted close-ups. Her figure loses definition until her movement becomes almost liquid. The camera then tightens on patients pressing their faces against the bars, producing a sequence of increasingly claustrophobic images. Only after this escalation does the custodian move through the crowd in search of his wife. The camera tracks beside him in a steady, forward motion, shot slightly above eye level, keeping us inside the turmoil as the riot breaks into full chaos. The sequence marks a turning point in the film's structure. What began as a performance becomes an eruption of collective emotion, the moment when imagination overtakes reason and the boundaries between the patient's delusions and the custodian's own state of mind begin to blur. As the film progresses, the custodian's sense of reality becomes increasingly unstable. He begins to imagine freeing his wife, attacking the hospital's chief doctor, and escaping together. These sequences appear calm at first, often shot with steady framing and softer lighting, but the tone quickly deteriorates as the imagery grows more fragmented. One of the most distinctive moments occurs near the end, when the custodian envisions himself putting smiles on everyone's faces. Through multiple exposures, grinning masks and fixed expressions overlap across the screen, forming one of the film's most unsettling images. The effect conveys his complete break from reality, as though he is forcing happiness onto a world that no longer responds to him. The dancer reappears soon after, this time wearing a featureless mask. It connects back to the earlier riot sequence and reinforces the film's recurring use of disguise and identity. In this context, the mask becomes an image of emotional erasure rather than concealment. The closing scenes return to the hospital. The custodian resumes his cleaning work, framed once again behind bars and latticed windows. When he tries to visit his wife, he is turned away. The final shot holds on him, slightly off-center, absorbed in his task, surrounded by the same confined geometry seen earlier. The repetition of this framing ties the ending to the beginning, closing the story not with resolution, but with repetition. The same motion, now emptied of meaning. A Page of Madness was released in select theaters in Japan, where its unconventional style divided audiences and critics. After its initial theatrical run, the film was not reissued and gradually faded from circulation, eventually believed to have been destroyed during World War II bombings. In 1971, Teinosuke Kinugasa rediscovered a surviving print of A Page of Madness, reportedly stored for decades among his own film materials. The version he found was incomplete, several minutes shorter than the original release and showing signs of wear and missing frames, but it was sufficient to reveal how carefully the film's visual structure had been planned. Following its restoration, A Page of Madness was screened internationally and quickly became a central topic in film scholarship. Its rediscovery reshaped understanding of early Japanese cinema, showing that independent, experimental work existed alongside the country's commercial studio output. The rediscovery of A Page of Madness in the 1970s altered the understanding of early Japanese cinema. It demonstrated that Japanese filmmakers were exploring abstraction, montage, and psychological subjectivity at the same time as, and sometimes independently from, their European contemporaries. Teinosuke Kinugasa later moved into mainstream production and achieved international recognition with Gate of Hell, 1953, which won both the Palme d'Or and an Academy Award. Despite this later success, A Page of Madness remains his most experimental and unconventional work. For film students, it offers a clear study in how filmmakers visualized interior states before the widespread use of sound. Every technique, handheld movement, overlapping exposure, rhythmic editing, serves a functional purpose, translating subjective experience into visual form. Nearly a century after its release, A Page of Madness continues to stand out as one of the most distinctive films of the silent era. Its fragmented editing, layered imagery, and focus on internal perspective make it an important reference point for understanding how cinema evolved from narrative documentation into psychological expression. The film's conclusion, The Custodian Trapped in Repetition, captures its central concern, how devotion and guilt can blur into delusion. The hospital becomes both a literal and mental space, confining not just the patients but also those who try to care for them. A Page of Madness remains complex in structure but remarkably clear in intention. It stands as a record of early experimentation, filmmakers testing how cinema could represent thought, memory, and emotion without words. Next time on Cinematic Century Chronicle, we'll move to 1927 and explore Metropolis, Fritz Lang's monumental vision of technology, class, and the future that helped define science fiction on screen. Subscribe and join me as we continue to chronicle 100 years of film, one story at a time. Until next time, have a great rest of your day.